So when is Cyberpunk 2077 coming out? This has been a major question on a lot of people's minds and something I think a lot of us are still digging for answers around. Recently, we actually got quite a bit of new information around this game in a behind-the-scenes PlayStation video. Unfortunately, as of right now, there is no new gameplay to go along with this, but there is quite a bit of new information, some of which concerning a release date, and in this video I'm going to lay out a lot of the facts around that. But even further, I haven't talked about Cyberpunk 2077 in quite a while on this channel, and I'd also like to touch on some of the other recent news around this game and really reasons you should be excited. I got to see this game behind closed doors at last year's E3 and it looks awesome. All of that gameplay is now live, you're actually seeing it in the background. And if you're a fan of RPG games in general, this will probably be a game that appeals to you. If you guys do enjoy the content, you can leave a like or subscribe, or even just if you're looking forward to Cyberpunk 2077. When this game does end up getting released, you can be certain that it will take up a major component of this channel. And to be clear, with this video, what I'm going to be doing is taking some of the recent news and actually intertwining them with past news over the past 5 months or so. If you weren't following the game too closely, you probably missed some of that past stuff as it wasn't huge news in its own right, but taken together, it actually does have fairly large implications. So one of the first pieces of news we got recently was that Cyberpunk 2077 would be appearing at this E3. So I wouldn't say this is shocking news by any rate. They were at last year's E3, they again did show the game behind closed doors, so I imagine we see something similar at this year's E3, maybe some new gameplay and maybe even a release date announcement. But speaking of release dates, that's been another topic of much discussion around this game. A lot of people are really curious as to when it's coming out, and we may have just got some indication of that. Over the past week or so, PlayStation has been releasing several behind-the-scenes videos looking at the developers of Cyberpunk 2077, CD Projekt Red. This is behind-the-scenes content, so it's assumed they have somewhat of a deeper look at the game than we do as a general person in the public. But even further, towards the end of their latest video, we heard this.
Cyberpunk 2077 may no longer be the mystery it once was, but work on it is far from over. True to the promise made in 2013, it's still coming when it's ready.
So a lot of people took that to mean that the 2019 release date is probably out the window. A lot of people are really hopeful we'd see this game as a holiday release for this year. But naturally, a term like far is fairly subjective. So around this, I also want to share with you several facts we know about Cyberpunk 2077 and potentially when it will be coming out. So roughly around 6 months ago, we did hear the news that Cyberpunk 2077 was totally playable from start to finish. This was mostly in reference to the main story, so you still have side quests and of course fixing any bugs or adding in additional features, but that obviously is a very large milestone. Outside of that, one of the other major and common themes around this game, and really just from CD Projekt Red in general, is not showing off gameplay or sharing details around this game until it's time to do so, until the game's ready to be shown off. In that same video from PlayStation, they actually discuss why they went silent after releasing the teaser trailer. If you're not familiar, we saw this teaser trailer all the way back in 2012. We didn't actually get a full proper reveal with this latest gameplay until, of course, this past year, 2018. A 6-year gap is pretty massive, especially in the games industry. The justification they give for that 6-year gap, though, was the iterative nature of game design. There were certain features added in during some of those builds that got removed in the final build, and just all in all, a lot was changing over that time. So what that indicates to us is that if they're finally ready to show it off, that means that this is probably a very good idea of what the final product will look like. Even though a lot of game companies out there are typically very ready to share details or even footage of their game, this game company was hesitant, which means when they finally are ready to share details and show gameplay, that's a bigger deal. It means that this game is much closer to release. But I would say one of the biggest points around a release date or potential release date is the fact that they really emphasized a release on current gen hardware. There was an article to come out this past October that talked about how they had a whole team optimizing the game from its start. They wanted to get it working on PS4 and Xbox One, and it seems like they're certainly dedicating resources to get the full experience on those consoles. A lot of rumors are circulating around next-gen hardware when the PS5 or Xbox 720 will actually end up getting released, and many of those suggest that they're not that far away, that it could potentially even be by late 2020. If that's the case, it certainly seems likely to me that we see a release of Cyberpunk 2077 either late this year, which I feel like with the recent comments is even less likely, but what's more likely is probably an early 2020 release. A lot of their games have actually gone for this release window. The Witcher 2, 3, and Witcher 3's DLC Blood and Wine all released in May. Now, of course, I'm pretty sure all of us would love to see the game come out earlier than that or even later this year, which still is possible, although I would say, again, probably unlikely. But the team behind this game have also commented on some of that. They've really emphasized how they want this to be a refined game, actually comparing it to the likes of Red Dead Redemption 2. And even though Red Dead Redemption 2's online mode wasn't the most polished, a lot of people have called the single-player story of that game one of the best of the decade. And if that's the goal they're setting for Cyberpunk 2077, or even alternatively trying to take that best of the decade title, I am more than happy to wait a few extra months. This is all going on during a time where we have releases like Fallout 76 or even Anthem more recently. I think now more than ever it's important to actually have a game come out that is bug-free and really just ready to come out. And it seems like CD Projekt Red know that, and they're emphasizing it with Cyberpunk 2077. They've discussed in the past how they have 400 developers working on this game, but even further, it just seems like they're trying to avoid most of the major controversies. It's not going to be exclusive to one store, even though CD Projekt Red actually own their own store with GOG. So no Epic Games exclusivity or even a Steam exclusivity, but even further, it's also going to be a game without microtransactions. But outside of that, they also shared some details on other aspects of this game. First and foremost, the setting and really design of it. If you guys aren't familiar, Cyberpunk 2077 is actually based off of another RPG, but it's actually a pen and paper RPG. They mentioned that with this game, their goal is really to please the fans of that pen and paper RPG, but also fans of other CD Projekt Red games, like The Witcher 3. But even further, it's actually going to be taking place in the same universe as that pen and paper game, but in a parallel timeline, so you could have your own characters. And specifically us, the main protagonist in the game, known as V, is going to be a character built around what we make them. That, of course, in the traditional sense of a character customization system, but even further, they mentioned that one of the main reasons they wanted to take this as a first-person game is because it's meant to be from the eyes of our character. We're telling our own story here. The focus of this game is meant to be on the character and their stories, and it's not really going to be one of those games where you're trying to save the entire world. They actually expand on this world aspect, talking about how actually making a world feel big when you have vehicles and other methods of quick transportation is very difficult and a lot different. In their previous game, The Witcher 3, you had a horse and, you just couldn't get around as quick. So it seems like one of the methods they're actually taking to do this is verticality. The CD Projekt Red team has actually been fairly active in answering fan questions that have given us an insight at some core details to this game. We know the game's going to have 6 separate districts and several different buildings among them. Those buildings will have different floors that you can explore, many of which will actually have unique things on them. So one building might have 4 different floors, each with its own little story or quest or something to discover. I think that's going to make this game very unique. A lot of games have big open worlds, but not too many games have a ton of verticality. You can normally go up and down in the sense that you could go up ladders or stairs, but to actually have genuine content, different stories right above or right below each other is going to be unique. They also have confirmed through the same way that there's actually going to be purchasable apartments. We see one apartment in some of the gameplay, and it's confirmed that that's just one option. You could have other ones if you want to spend the money to get it. And even though this game looks and feels very similar to Grand Theft Auto, and even the developers themselves, as I mentioned earlier in this video, are comparing it to the polish of Red Dead Redemption, they say it's going to be distinctively different than Grand Theft Auto. This will be a story-driven game at its heart. It'll have a very serious tone, but at the same time, it's not going to take itself too seriously. There still will be room for goofing around and kind of doing your own thing. But at the same time, speaking of that story-driven tone, they also mention how certain side quests that you complete during this game will actually interact with the main story. So it's not like those will just be in isolation. Helping a certain low-level thug may actually impact you during a quest for that same gang later on. They don't give too many explicit examples of this, but it actually sounds really cool. Like each playthrough will have real distinct differences based on which side quests you complete or don't complete, and then which kind of effects those have on main story missions. Another thing they touch on in this same article is that cops in this game aren't going to be a pushover. Cops are going to be powerful. They're going to have cyber implants. This is something we've seen in some of the other gameplay, and it's going to be a fairly major part of this game. But even further, they're going to have high-tech weapons, so the cops in this game probably won't be as similar as they were or you're used to maybe in Grand Theft Auto or even some of the other games out there. And even beyond that, just as an added bonus, we got this Cupid picture recently on Twitter. I don't have a ton to say about it, but hey, it looks cool and it just gives you a good idea of the art style of this game. But all in all, that pretty much wraps it up for everything I had to share with you around Cyberpunk 2077. As we approach E3 or potentially just get more news around this game, expect more videos on it. As I mentioned before, I really think this is going to be one of the biggest games of the past few years, and I think CD Projekt Red knows that and is really trying to make sure they do it right. In the comments down below, let me know, when do you think this game is coming out? Are you excited for it? Are you not excited for it? There certainly are things I don't love about it, but just the overall feel and look at this game based off what we've seen thus far, which 48 minutes of gameplay is actually quite a bit. It's a lot more than we saw Fallout 76 or many other games initially, and based off what I've seen, I am certainly ready for this. I would love to see a late 2019 release date. I think we'll find out either way at this E3, but if I was a betting man, again, early 2020 is where I would be putting my money. But you know what? That's mostly okay because we still have the Outer Worlds coming out in 2019, and both of those games should make up a good chunk of content on this channel. So that pretty much wraps it up for this one. As always, again, I thank you all for watching. Hopefully you found this video informative, but with that, I hope to see you all next time. Later.